Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits VOD, countless others end up DOA. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Korngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. We are on the final week of our miniseries, Stephen King Unseen. So on this 4-part limited audio series, we uncovered canceled, lost, and troubled adaptations from the master of horror. Today, in our 4th and final episode, we take a literally shocking look at a very frightening afterlife as we sort of dissect the path that his book Revival has had to getting adapted. Joining us, as always, is our co-host for Stephen King Unseen. We have podcaster and constant reader Rachel Reeves. So, of course, you know Rachel from other amazing podcasts like The Losers Club, Halloweenies, The Pod and the Pendulum, The Girls on the Boys, and, of course, her amazing writing here at Dread Central. Rachel, can you, for one more time, introduce yourself to Development Hell?
Hi, hello. My name is Rachel Reeves, and yes, I am a podcaster and a writer. I'm obsessed with all things horror, whether it be on the page or on the screen. I'll take it however it comes, and could not be more thrilled to be back here today to talk about Revival.
Yeah, we've had some strange sort of selections for this miniseries. You know, we've had classics like The Dark Tower, books people don't really talk about, like The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon and The Long Walk. And now it's Revival. I wonder, could you just give me a little seminar on, like, what this book is all about?
Sure, yes. While some of the books that we have previously talked about and we've mentioned are like very YA friendly and actually would be great for younger Stephen King readers or people who are maybe a little bit younger who are interested in getting Stephen King. Revival is not one of them, folks. So this is not something I would hand somebody for their first Stephen King book at, a tender teenage age or pre-teenage. This is going to be talking about some very adult themes, I feel like, that I'm sure we'll get into. But for folks who aren't so sure, Revival is a newer Stephen King book. Yes, I'm going to call it newer. Published on November 11th, 2014 from Scribner, of course. And it's at a comfortable 405 pages. So, not like a light novella or whatever, but also not a huge doorstop either. Just, easy breezy, 405 pages. Not talking about this movie.
In fact, it feels so much longer, kind of, but we'll get to
that. I was like, this book is... And so King first talked about this book that he was in the process of writing it in February of 2014. And I believe he was on some sort of like live stream where he was talking, my gosh, now I can't remember. He was talking about something else, but then hinted like, oh, yeah, casual drop, like, oh, I'm, halfway through writing this other book called Revival. Everybody's like, excuse me? All right, we're ready. We're here. We're waiting.
That was not even on the outline. So do you just remember that from 10 years ago?
But I remember reading that somewhere. And I think that's how, like, word first spread about this. And I love how he does that. I think that's like the same thing when he was on the Losers Club and he casually dropped up talking about, oh yeah, I've got this Cujo sequel short story called Rattlesnake that's going to be, and he just drops these little hints. And I love that about him just because he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He is Taylor Swift. That would be a twist.
It's kind of like the ending of Revival, but we'll keep going.
And so audiences first got a little glimpse of what Revival is going to be about when he included an excerpt at the end of the paperback version of Doctor Sleep, which came out in June of 2014. So another little taste there.
Mhm.
And as far as like where he kind of got this inspiration or what sparked the idea for this story. So in Rolling Stone, King talked about that Revival was inspired by Arthur. I don't know how to say this. Arthur Machen. Sorry,
it.
Artie boy, butchering your name. He was inspired by his story called The Great God Pan. And of course, not surprising at all to anybody who's read this book, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And, like several of his preceding novels, this is an idea that he has been thinking about since he was a kid, mulling over, and has been pondering over. And I think as he was getting older, really had to get out. And so this is, something that's been percolating for a while. And I think we've seen little snippets of these ideas in a lot of his work. And I'm sure we're going to, I'll talk about that more as we go on. There's a lot of material here that will be familiar territory for King fans, but we haven't seen it quite like this.
I, of course, see the similarities to Frankenstein. I have to say, I'm not really sure. Like, I've heard of the book, The Great God Pan, but I don't really know anything about it, to be honest with you. Have you heard of that one?
No.
Okay,
No, I haven't. Gracious reader, first reader, and he's just one of those people that he gets an idea, he just takes that little nugget, he stashes it in a drawer and saves it for later. And that is the case here, it sounds like, and he'll just pull it out whenever he feels like, all right, the story, it's time to get this story out.
There's another author that sort of gets included in the Revival conversation a lot, which is Lovecraft. And I don't know if King has directly mentioned his influence on this book specifically with Lovecraft, but it's there, and we'll talk about it in just a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a summary for you guys today off of Goodreads. So their sort of tagline for the book was a dark and electrifying novel about addiction, fanaticism, and what might exist on the other side of life. And here is what they have for the summary. In a small New England town over half a century ago, a shadow falls over a small boy playing with his toy soldiers. Jamie Morton looks up to see a striking man, the new minister. Charles Jacobs, along with his beautiful wife, will transform the local church. The men and boys are all a little bit in love with Mrs. Jacobs. The women and girls feel the same about Reverend Jacobs, including Jamie's mother and beloved sister Claire. With Jamie, the Reverend shares a deeper bond based on a secret obsession. When tragedy strikes the Jacobs family, this charismatic preacher curses God, mocks all religious belief, and is banished from the shocked town. Jamie has demons of his own. Wed to his guitar from the age of 13, he plays in bands across the country, living a nomadic lifestyle of bar band rock and roll while fleeing from his family's horrific loss. In his mid-30s, addicted to heroin, stranded, and desperate, Jamie meets Charles Jacobs again, with profound consequences for both men. Their bond becomes a pact beyond even the devil's devising, and Jamie discovers that revival has many meanings. This rich and disturbing novel spans 5 decades on its way to the most terrifying conclusion Stephen King has ever written. It's a masterpiece from King in the great American tradition of Frank Norris, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Edgar Allan Poe. Do you think that sort of does the book justice? Or how do you feel about that?
It does. That's interesting that they name 3 writers other than what King, mentioned.
So it's a whole new slew. I mean, sure, why not?
I don't necessarily disagree. I think that that is fair to say, because it is very much like a slice of life story about this person throughout, a long period of time, but it's also extremely dark. And I don't necessarily want to spoil the ending for this book. I'm not sure, we didn't talk about that,
We
but
didn't talk. I have to say, I want to. How do you feel about that?
I think we just maybe should give a warning here, or like let
Yeah,
people know if we're going to spoil it, because it
they need
is,
to
I
know.
will agree, it is one of King's best
Scariest?
endings, as far, scariest, kind of surprising, well executed endings. And if somebody wants to go into that without any spoilers and wants to discover it for themselves, maybe just
Yeah.
let them know. But it's
So
still, you know what, the journey is still worth it. And even if honestly, it doesn't make it any less, like, it doesn't hit any less
honestly, I think
hard,
it
I
might
think.
help just because it's
Yeah.
such a slow book that you
Yeah.
might not know you're on your way to anywhere, and we promise you that you are. So we will
Yes.
spoil the ending, but we will give notice before we do that, I think. What I like about the summary is that, yeah, it kind of like tackles the two main periods, even though it's over 50 years. It's the important sections are sort of the modern time with uh Jamie Morton as an adult, and his childhood, and how this reverend sort of impacted both him as an adult and as a child.
Yeah. So let's talk about these characters and who this story is kind of about. So, yeah, Jamie Morton is the protagonist of the story. He's who we are seeing this whole story through. We're seeing it through his eyes and his kind of life experience and thought on that. He was just a boy. We meet him when I think he's 6 years old.
Mm.
And, growing up with his family in this small town. And that's how he meets Charles Jacobs, who came into the town as a Methodist minister. And when he came there, he really had an impact on Jamie Morton and, inspired him in a lot of ways and really connected with him in a completely appropriate, fine, normal way. Nothing weird there.
Mhm.
At one point, Charles Jacobs, the minister, his wife and his son die under really horrific circumstances, and that changes everything. That shifts everything for him. And that is when everything changes, and he really goes off the deep end a little bit, which is understandable. And that also similarly has an effect on Jamie, and that follows him through the rest of his life and
Mhm.
will come up again when he meets Charles at later points in his life. Astrid is Jamie's first girlfriend, his first real love, who he also meets later in life when she becomes sick with cancer, and their lives intersect once again when they're in their late 50s, 60s, I think, so much later in their life. Mary Faye is a terminally ill woman who we meet towards the end of the book, who Charles Jacobs, who also has an odd like obsession with electricity. I don't even know if we've mentioned
We
that,
haven't
but
even
like
gotten there yet. Yeah.
has like a sick obsession, a just incredibly deep fascination with electricity and how it functions throughout his life, before, like, when we meet him to when we leave him. And Mary Faye is kind of his ultimate end goal, who he plans on, spoiler alert, reviving.
Oh yeah.
Reviving.
There you go. Yeah.
Hence the Frankenstein comps, because he wants to know what the afterlife is like and what happens to his wife and son, who we mentioned had died. Connie, we meet when Jamie
Mm.
is a child. It's his older brother, who Jacobs actually does help by giving him a electricity, like, shock treatment as a kid. And apparently
Mhm.
that worked and helps him get his voice back after he suffers a pretty serious throat vocal cord injury of some sort. We also, one of the major characters, Hugh Yates, who's a friend of Jacob's, who gives Jamie a job when he needs it most at a recording studio, and is also a previous patient of Reverend Jacobs, and who Reverend Jacobs cured him of his deafness. So those are kind of the key players that will come up again and again throughout the book.
Yeah. I mean, it's not quite a spoiler yet, but the Mary Faye stuff is sort of what leads us to our conclusion. And yeah, he does revive her, but not with the purpose of actually bringing her back. I think just for the purpose of talking to her and getting her, as you said, sort of her account of what the afterlife might be like. Fucking weird.
Yeah, and I think that's this is a good way to talk about some of the themes because Reverend Jacobs is just he wants to use Mary Faye. He wants to use her
Yeah.
as this vessel to get what he wants and use her as a connection to the afterlife, and similarly wants to use Jamie to as, a player in this goal. And it's, one of the major themes I think that we see throughout this whole thing is just kind of the ideas and the consequences of human ambition and how far people will go for this kind of knowledge, and maybe it's knowledge that they shouldn't be pursuing. And some things, it's like, some things are pretty dark, and maybe you shouldn't be messing around with things that you maybe don't fully understand, and things that are forbidden for a reason, whether it's forbidden by, I don't know, religion, science, human decency, any of those things. All of those things are going to have consequences, and just sort of like, are you ready to deal with the weight of those consequences? And are you sure that that's a door you want to go a knocking on?
Yeah, it's kind of a monkey's paw situation.
Yeah. And yeah, as we mentioned, Reverend Jacobs is obsessed with electricity. And while I think it starts innocently enough, kind of just these sort of parlor tricks or sort of, just mild curiosity of how electricity works, it does spiral and it does evolve into some really kind of messed up things where he's literally using, people as guinea pigs and being sort of reckless with what he's doing and not fully. I mean, he's not a doctor. This guy's not a doctor,
No.
not a, scientist as we would, I think, like to think or consider a scientist. But yeah, a lot of ethical dilemmas and kind of
Yeah.
ideas around that.
They could think I call him a faith healer because he like gives up being a reverend and sort of moves himself into like a carnival, I guess. Is that how I describe it?
Yeah, he's like touring a bunch of carnivals. He's doing sort of like the carnival circuit, but also kind of presenting himself as a like tent revival sort of preacher or minister, where people are coming to him as sort of like last desperate attempts to get help, where science has failed them. They turn to him because he's promising, like, I can do what your doctors have not been able to. And he's doing this sort of thing under the I don't know, a mask of religion, a mask of that he's doing God's work, but it's really him operating as like a mad scientist
Yeah.
and using people and not really caring about what happens to them after the fact. In
No.
fact, Jamie finds out like a lot of these people that Reverend Morton has been experimenting on have horrific consequences down the road.
Yes.
And he just doesn't care about that because he's using them to get to his end goal and doesn't actually care about the people in the lives that he's necessarily affecting.
I want to talk about that really quickly. And it
Yeah.
kind of mini spoilers here, so we don't hear them speed ahead like 20 seconds. But yeah, we learn that, as you were saying, everyone that he's healed in the past have had dark consequences, from suicide to losing their minds and having to be institutionalized to ending up murdering other people. And, we learn sort of why that happens later on. But it's sort of like, yeah, he's performing psychic surgeries on these people, and it doesn't turn out very well.
No, yeah. And, on top of that, well, I guess coupled with that, we get this ideas of like the ideas of faith. We see these themes of faith and fanaticism bleeding throughout this entire book, and especially, tied to this kind of middle period, I think, around Reverend Jacobs, especially when he starts going on this sort of tent revival circuit. And this part is so fascinating to me about this book because I think this is something that King has always wrestled with. And we only see that, like, we see it so many ways, and especially it kind of shifts after his accident, I think. And it reminded me of this quote from Pet Sematary, which I dug up. Because, okay, yeah, reminded me of this quote from Pet Sematary, which was written in 1983 or published in 1983. So this is way before Revival. And he says, faith is a great thing, and really religious people would like us to believe that faith and knowing are the same thing, but I don't believe that myself, because there are too many different ideas on the subject. What we know is this: when we die, one of two things happens. Either our souls and thoughts somehow survive the experience of dying, or they don't. If they do, that opens up every possibility you could think of. If they don't, it's just blotto, the end. So I think that, like, that is such just an example that this is something that King's been thinking out for a really long time. And I honestly think that Revival is sort of a culminating text on this idea that he's been thinking about, along with, obviously just the idea of death in general and what is eternity. And I mean, obviously, it's something that affects everybody, right? In Shawshank Redemption, he says, get busy living or get busy dying, because those are your two options, right? So, and I think after his accident, he really started to look at things differently. And I think that's safe to say that anybody who's literally confronted by death and like the possibility of death in such a real way, of course those thoughts are going to linger. Of course those thoughts are going to shift for you, I think. And we started this journey with the Dark Tower, and I think that this is also another really good bookend because the Dark Tower is kind of what he wanted to finish that because that was his legacy. And I think that the accident in that period of time really sort of encouraged him, like, I have to finish this. I have to finish this. I have to do this. And then Revival is also another really good side of that, where he gets to explore some of these darker ideas and just get it out there, because sometimes, you have these thoughts and you're like, this is too dark to even think about, like, but I have to think about it. And by confronting that darkness, I'm able to process it and not let it have such power over me. And I really think that that's kind of what Revival is just somebody exploring these ideas in a safe place and being like, okay, yes, that, just like he says in Pet Cemetery, it opens up every possibility you could think of. And I think this is a possibility, and this is kind of a dark possibility, but it's out there. And I think this is his way of sort of just admitting that and getting it out there and exercising those demons a little bit.
That was beautiful. I just want to say, that was really, really nice. I was in that. Yeah, I agreed with everything you just said, and him using the term "just blotto" about there being nothing afterwards, scary. And I do think a lot of the time when people consider there being nothing after death to be that's sort of worst case scenario. I have never felt that way. I think we've talked about this previously. The idea of eternity or forever is like what scares me, if it's good or if it's bad. That's what we get in, I think, with the ending of Revival. I think now we will be doing some spoilers. Scooch ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear them, because this will be the section that we get into this. I want to talk a little bit first why people describe this book as Lovecraftian. So, Rachel, what does Lovecraftian mean to you?
I think to me, it really just kind of references creatures, other worlds, other gods, other possibilities other than what exist on our version of a mortal coil, right? So sort of these chaos agents and I think that we get that in here. So I think that when people are mentioning this as Lovecraftian, it's really like referencing a lot of the creatures that we get in the final, act of this, when we see what Jacobs has tapped into with his experimenting. So that's what I usually take to be Lovecraftian.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure true. I also think when I think of Lovecraft, I think of this like unknowable horrors, and unknowable in a couple of ways. Like often they can be so huge, physically gigantic, in so deep in outer space or so deep underwater that like our puny human brains can't comprehend it, and if we saw it we would lose our minds. Lovecraft loves when something's so scary you lose your mind, because I think it saves you from having to really describe it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever would make you lose your mind.
Because I'm like, that's bad. Oh. But yeah, that's kind of like, that's sort of Lovecraftian. It's also fear of the unknown and like, just like, I think unknowable horror really does it for me. And that's what we get in the finale of this book. In the finale of the book, as you were talking about the Mary Faye character before,
Yeah.
she becomes our conduit to the other world. And this character, this Reverend, is so desperate for reassurance that his wife and his child, when they passed on, had a happy ending. And so he uses his newfound electrical abilities to use this woman as a conduit to the other side. He doesn't want to bring her back. He just wants to ask her, what is it like on the other side?
Mhm.
And he gets an answer, but it's a horrible answer, and it is not the one that he was looking for. Basically, the other side is a realm of chaos that is overrun by gigantic monsters that look kind of like ginormous ants. And they're ginormous and they're horrifying and they torture human beings for all of eternity. And it's this realm called the Null. And it's where you go. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there is just the Null. And what's worse is that we're not just hearing about the Null, but poor Mary becomes a portal to the Null herself. And basically, we do go there and we sort of get to experience what it's like. And it's just nightmarish. It's other dimensional, mind melting, Lovecraftian creature horror. And we see that it's run, there is kind of like a godlike figure, and it's this female ant they call Mother, who is fucking scary, and they manage to escape, or they manage to close the void, I think, by shooting the body of Mary. And so they do manage to get away from all of this horror, although some of them don't make it. But to me, what's so scary is not what they go through, but the final act of the book, which just sees our main character move to Hawaii and get on antidepressants and go to therapy, knowing for the rest of his life that when he dies, he'll be going back to the Null. And I think he even starts to sort of see the veil between him and the Null, I think, is a little bit lifted, and he sees like a hole in a wall where that beckons him and tries to ignore it, but he knows that in the end everybody finds their way back to Mother. I don't even like just talking about it is like giving me the woofs. I love it so fucking much. Does it scare you like it scares me?
It is. And like this is definitely a bleak bummer of a book when you
Yeah.
end. Like there is no happy ending here. This does not like, oh, it turns around and everything's fine. No. This is definitely one of his darker endings.
Yeah.
But it's also like not so, while this is kind of a darker ending, a darker story for him, it's not unking-like. Like we've seen this before, whether it's a film adaptation or actually some of his book. I mean, The Mist. Come on.
Oh yeah,
The Mist,
that's true.
The Mist
That's a bad
movie
one.
ending. Oh, that's a bummer. And then you've even got, Carrie doesn't end super great. The Shining, Pet Cemetery, and even Lisi's story has some elements that really remind me of this, especially like we were talking about some of that Lovecraftian stuff.
Yeah, he does have rude endings fairly often. It's true. Not this rude, though. And the Goodreads summary said it's the scariest finale. Do you agree with that?
Yes, because I think it's definitely up there. I think it's arguable if it's the scariest, but it is for sure one of the scariest because it's not just scary for our characters, it's kind of scary for us. Like I feel like it's one of those
Uh-huh.
books that has you questioning your own beliefs and what you believe. And
Yeah.
I think that is really effective here. And so in that way, it like transcends the book itself and actually makes you worry for your own mortality and what's going to happen. So in that way,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it absolutely is scary.
I don't think he ever really lets us know if everyone on planet Earth does go to the Null when they die, or if it's just maybe people that are affected by Charles's sort of treatments. But it's not good. So is this the second time that you've read this book?
It is. Yeah, I listened to the audiobook this time, which is not like I will warn people like the guy who reads it. He sounds he takes his time, let's just say that. And I
Okay.
think that's a problem with his voice. It's just a little old manny. But yeah, I also read the book kind of close to when it came out. So within within a year or two of when it came out.
How does it like hold up for you? How did it change over time? Do you like it more? Like how did that journey go?
I loved reading it, having a little bit of time away from it. I loved it at the time. And rereading it now, it also hits hard. And I think it's one of those things where it's just like kind of gives you anxiety a little bit because it's, I'm 10 years closer. I'm 10 years older
No,
than
to
when
the
I
null.
first,
Yeah.
10 years closer. I don't know how I feel about this. And I think it only
where does it sort
gets
of
scarier.
land in terms of, your King canon?
I love this book. I know not everybody does,
Mhm.
because it definitely, I think, takes its time getting to its final destination. But I really love it. I mean, to me, this is King firing on all cylinders. So this is probably in like my top 25.
That's big considering how many books he has. Yeah, this is one of my favorites too. I just, I really connect with King when he's at his scariest, be it with the novels or the stories. And so that's what we have. Like, this is a full-blown cosmic existential horror novel. And, he doesn't always go this direction. Often it's the horrors of humanity or, things that are not quite as mind melty. But this one goes for the jugular. And God, I'm really, like, I think about it a lot. So yeah,
Not too much.
every minute of my life. I'm very curious because I know that there have been basically two major attempts to bring this to the screen. I'm wondering, can you sort of let us know, the first of these goes?
Yes. So the first attempt to bring this story to the big screen, I believe, came in 2016 from Mr. Josh Boone. So
Mhm.
Josh Boone, people most likely know him. He directed the adaptation of The Fault in Our Stars and also worked on projects like The Vampire Chronicles, X-Men The New Mutants, which is a development hell all of its own. And he really wanted to do revival. So he worked on a spec script, and he worked along with producer Michael DeLuca, and he wrote the adaptation of the book. And when they submitted it to Universal, they started pitching this around, and they submitted it, and they got a deal, I believe. Like, they got a kind of a deal on it, but I think ultimately it all kind of fell apart when it came to money, because doesn't it all? And Boone had really high expectations, I think, for what he wanted to do with this, and it was a personal story to him. So what I respect about Boone in this situation is that he wasn't going to do it unless he could do it right. And I think sometimes that takes a lot of guts for a filmmaker to walk away from something if they know, like, this is not going down a path that I can back, and this is not going to turn out the way that I want it to, and I'm just not going to do it. So I think that's kind of something that Boone found himself in a corner and had to make a decision. And there was a quote that he gave to Deadline in 2016. And would you mind reading that for me?
Okay, this is my best Josh Boone impression. Are you ready?
Okay.
When I read Revival, I was like, man, did you write this for me? Get it? Because it's just not an impression. I've been on both sides of that pendulum. I call myself a non-believer now. And when I moved to LA, I was like Neo being pulled out of the Matrix. Oh my God, none of that stuff is true. But it's what I've been taught, and it's what I believed since I was in childhood. I believed in the devil, in Jesus. And even now, as a non-believer, I'm still fascinated by that world. And Revival is the scariest thing he's written since Pet Sematary. He tricks you, drawing you in gently with the narrator's voice and a long time span that reminds you of the Shawshank Redemption or the Green Mile. And then he pulls the rug from under you in the last act, and you're like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? The secret of electricity starts as this wonderful thing and gets progressively darker. Jamie calls Charles on it, but sticks around because he, like the rest of us, wants to know what's on the other side. It's powerhouse stuff. And two of the best characters he's written since Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates in the Oscar-winning Turn and Misery. I still intend to make The Stand, but I need more time. And when I asked Steve about Revival, he put me together with Mike DeLuca.
Oh, he still intends to make The Stand, huh? Okay, well,
And
yeah,
he
I guess.
did.
No, I was.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess he was like putting The Stand on hold for this, but that's not really how it happened in the end.
Yeah, it's an interesting turn of events. And then he also had this interesting quote that when he was talking to creative screenwriting, same year, 2016. Do you want to read this one as well?
Mhm. Sure. Okay, so he said with them, I've had very, very different screenwriting experiences based on how the project comes together. For example, I have a good relationship with Stephen King, so when I wanted to adapt his novel Revival, I really just went and asked him. I was able to write it in a very pleasant bubble, and we attached Russell Crowe. I wrote Revival in a bubble in a month, did a rewrite a few months later that took 2 weeks, and I just haven't touched it since. We just went and put the money and cast together. It's certainly a better way of doing things, but the opportunity to do these big properties, you have to go through much longer processes to get the same end result. Revival is much more manageable. We're just trying to line up movies to do one after another, and so many of them are based on books that I loved when I was young.
Okay.
Okay, so that's interesting because they clearly got Russell Crowe involved for that lead role.
I don't know if I like that.
Not at
to be
all. You know who
to
I was
be
thinking
honest.
while we were talking? Is this an okay time for me to tell you who I think would be good for that role?
Yes, please.
I was thinking maybe I'm not even a big fan, but for some reason James McAvoy was coming to my brain.
Interesting. Yeah,
What do you
I
think of
think he
that?
would. I think that could work. Although the character does eventually get a little bit older,
That's
so I'm not.
true.
I don't think James McAvoy is quite there.
No, no.
There's been a lot of Mr. Robot playing in my house at this current moment in time, which made me also think of like
Okay.
Christian Slater in that role, because Christian
Weird.
Slater is that he can be really dark, but he still has like this kind of all-American, childish, really handsome, kind of
Vibe.
jock. These good, but he also, I mean, clearly a lot of his roles have this darker element that he can really sell and really turn. So I think that he could balance kind of the darker side of our main character, as well as sort of the nicer guy, the guy
Hmm.
that he turns into after he
I
cleans up
love
his
that. I think
act.
that really works.
Yeah. And then, okay, what else did he say here that I thought was interesting? Yeah, Russell Crowe. I don't know. Russell Crowe, I don't see at all. So I think
No.
why is everything Russell Crowe? It's like Russell Crowe or Gerard Butler. Either one is.
Crow and Azalea Banks as the two leads. Okay.
Oh, so let's see. Where are we next? In 2017, we're into 2017 now. So an artist named Vincent Chong, he was hired to create some art. And so he uploaded some concept art that he created for the project by Josh Boone. And it's super cool. So I think that we're going to link this in the show notes because it's definitely worth checking out and has some really interesting visuals for the idea that are very exciting. And let's see. Next quote that we have comes in 2019. So time is flying by and nothing's happening. So here's another quote from Josh Boone that he gave Club Stephen King on Reddit.
Yes. And so actually I think this was Club Stephen King, who is kind of like a well-respected Stephen King resource in the world of like Stephen King news. And they took to Reddit. And this is what they had to say about the whole Josh Boone situation when someone was wondering if he was actually still making this movie. And Club Stephen King wrote, he has the rights of several King books, but so far hasn't had the opportunity to do any. However, it has been officially announced that he will turn The Stand into a 12-hour miniseries for CBS All Access. And they're working on that now, but it probably won't be released, before 2020. Until then, I guess his other King projects won't be moving. Some options may even expire, who knows? And Steven Spielberg did say last year that he wanted to make an adaptation of The Talisman before 2020, and that's probably not going to happen, at least not by Josh Boone.
And spoiler alert, it did not happen before 2020.
No,
the Talisman
it has not
part.
happened.
However, the Stand part did happen in 2020. So yeah, Boone did go on to craft the Stand miniseries for CBS All Access, now Paramount Plus. Who knows what it'll be tomorrow? And I can honestly say that the best part of that miniseries is Alexander Skarsgård. So
Okay, well, There you
If you're a
go.
Skarsgård fan, check it out. If you're proceed with caution.
You know what? Just check out the Mick Garris version. You know.
Yeah. But Josh Boone, this guy, I feel bad because he's so he seems like he's got such enthusiasm for this project, but he also made the New Mutants, which obviously we all know has a very troubled production history.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going on with him. And I have not seen The Fault in Our Stars, so I cannot speak to that one. But so
Mhm.
far, Josh Boone is striking out with me personally. I don't know. How do
Yeah.
you feel about his projects?
So I saw The Fault in Our Stars, which like seems like a different universe from anything Stephen King related. But I think because that did so well, Hollywood was like, "Here you go, the keys to the kingdom." And
Yeah.
then when a couple of other things maybe didn't go so well, the keys were maybe revoked. Hopefully not, but possibly. I have not seen the New Mutants, and I have not seen The Stand 2020, so I cannot really speak on them. But I do know, fans have had sort of conflicting opinions about both. I don't know. I feel for him, and he seems very passionate about these projects. And I read, a quote from him online when he was 10 years old, he mailed a bunch of his like secret Stephen King books to Stephen King to get signed because like his parents didn't let him read it, and then Stephen King like sent him back all of these like long notes encouraging him to be a writer, and it like changed his life. And
Oh my God.
I know it's really cute and beautiful, and now they're obviously friends, and this guy's living his like best life, and also he is like super cute, so I root for him. But yeah, I don't know. I guess this isn't 2014 anymore, so I think he needs a win at this point.
It's true. He does need a win, but
Yeah, we all do.
this is not.
No, probably not, because this was the first attempt. There was a well sort of publicized second attempt at making Revival. So speed forward a couple of months to May 2020, and Deadline got wind that pod favorite Mike Flanagan got the rights to adapt Revival, and he was going to write a script for Universal to check out, and that he was going to be producing it with Trevor Macy with his own Intrepid Pictures. I mean, we've talked about Mike Flanagan on this podcast just so many times, but
I know.
we've touched base on him pretty thoroughly already in Stephen King Unseen. How do we feel about him again, Rachel? Where do we land with Flanagan?
I really like Flanagan. I get
Me too.
people's issues with him, but like whatever. I love a monologue.
Correct.
Give me all the confetti. Like I'm all about it, and I think he has such a beautiful way of talking about some of these dark themes and issues of religion and love and death. And so yeah, Flanistan, me all in. And I think Revival is such perfect.
So good for
Flanagan
him.
knows. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I feel like Flanagan knows where his strengths lie as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, and he gravitates towards those kind of pictures.
Yeah,
Whoa, what an
he
idea.
does.
Like crazy. Cannot believe it.
Yeah.
And so I think Revival, he would really, this is a playground that he would thrive in, I feel like.
It is. We talked about him previously because he is sort of in line, let's say, to adapt The Dark Tower as a television series. But of course, he's also done adaptations for Doctor Sleep and Gerald's Game and his like own amazing works as well. He also did an amazing series on Netflix called Midnight Mass, which in a lot of ways is thematically similar to Revival in terms of the charismatic preacher that leads the pact. And I don't have official word on this, but I think I remember him even saying that the projects were maybe a little bit too similar, and that may have been part of why he moved along. But we did get a sort of quote from him on the Kingcast, which is an amazing Stephen King podcast, in 2020, where he talks about how mean and bleak the script he wrote was. I was wondering if you could give us your best Mike Flanagan.
Sure. He says, "What I love about it is it's a return to cosmic horror, which I think is so fun. It is relentlessly dark and cynical, and I'm enjoying the hell out of that. This is just bleak and mean, and I like it for that. I haven't gotten to end a movie that way since Absentia, maybe Ouija. This one was a really fun piece of material for me because I get to be like, you want a dark ending? Okay, cool. Get ready. I will be very curious to see if they let me make it.
And I do believe, Stephen King apparently did love his adaptation or his script, which doesn't surprise me. Unfortunately, by the end of that year, both, incidentally, Mike Flanagan and Boone were on a podcast about The Stand, which is called The Company of the Mad, where they discussed, both of their attempts at trying to make revival. And here's the last we've heard on Flanagan about his attempt. Will you get it again?
Yeah. He says, I stepped on the exact same landmine and ended up in the exact same place. We should get together someday and share boards and drafts and scars. I kind of hit the same wall with it where it was just so expensive. Man, did I love it though.
So tragic because, I mean, I don't know. I don't have so much of an opinion on Josh Boone, but if you check out the concept art that he had, it's like cool and scary. And obviously this guy was really, or is really passionate about it, which is what we would want. And then of course Mike Flanagan, who has the Midas touch, especially when it comes to King. So Rachel, when it comes to these adaptations, which one would you have wanted, and why?
I mean, I would take Flanagan only because he has a proven track record of success for me. Like, while I don't 100% love every single thing he's done, it's all good,
All good.
and unfortunately, compared to Josh, he just has more, in the pro column for him. So yeah.
Do we think we're ever gonna see revival?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just a matter of time. Like, honestly, I think Flanagan's just going to keep making projects, forever until he can't make them anymore. And King is always going to be one of his top options as far as what to make. But I get it. With Midnight Mass, it's all about balance and you don't want to do the same thing like too close to each other. So I'm sure it's just, what he can do at the right times and where he can get the funding and what's going to go. And so I think it'll be made at some point. It's too good a book. It's too tempting, I think, especially in the horror realm for it not to be made. But it is a lesser known title, so it could be take some time.
I agree with you because it's never been made before. It's not really an IP in the same way that other King is. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to know, but I really hope they do it one day because I do think it's not one of these sort of unquote unadaptable stories. So much of it is grounded in reality and just people talking that I think they could really do it. So I have hopes. I do. Rachel, that's the last episode of Stephen King Unseen. How do we feel?
I am so grateful that I was able to go on this journey with you and talk, because they're such fascinating titles. And it just shows that, Stephen King never is out of fashion, never out of style. He's got highs and lows, but there's so much more there to mine. And for the studios that just keep, returning to the same IP over and over again, it's their loss, because there's incredible titles like Revival out there, and like everything that we've talked about that would all make wonderful films or TV shows or whatever. So, when people get tired, it's okay. There's still a lot more out there, and hopefully someday, maybe we'll see them and not just get thrown into the null with all the other,
I should turn the name of the podcast. Oh God, Salem Lot is in the null. That could be the name of this podcast, really, at this point. Yeah, I mean, the good news and the bad news is that I do think Stephen King adaptations are going to be in development hell forever. Something's gonna be there. So maybe one day we'll do Stephen King Unseen 2, bigger, better, and gorier.
I would love that. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll put it in development. Rachel, where can you be found on the internet if you wanted to be found?
Sure. You can find me anytime over on Instagram at the Vinyl Girl, GRRRL, or on Twitter at Vinyl Girl, or you can find my writing on Dread Central.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Stephen King Unseen, and I'm sure this will be not the last time we hang out. Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.